Welcome, today's story is full of drama. Like and subscribe to stay updated. Let's get started.
A great thinker once remarked that man is always hopeful for a better tomorrow, but I doubt he had me in mind when he said it. I was sitting in the dim light eating a cold piece of steak with a bowl of crackers and milk. The steak provided protein to stave off hunger, while the crackers and milk were a comforting habit I enjoyed. It wasn't exactly a nutritionist's ideal meal, but my health numbers were fine, so I stuck to what I liked. For the past 3 years, I've lived alone ever since my wife, Emily, left while I was serving time in jail. Since then, I've kept to myself, only venturing out for my job where I work as a milling machine operator. The house I live in belonged to my father and grandfather before him, now passed down to me. I could technically go by James Walker III, but rarely did. My parents had retired to a condo in Georgia, visiting only during the summer. The only time anyone crossed my threshold since Emily left. She still lived in town, but our lives no longer intersected. I had 85 acres of land, half of it being woodland. To entertain myself, I was out there most days when I had free time, in the woods working or just walking. There was nothing like a gentle wind sighing through the pines to calm and blunt the bitterness I felt about how life had dumped on me. There was no hesitation going out into the woods when it was blowing a gale either. That rather matched some dark, depressing thoughts that visited me now and then. The open fields and pasture I let out to a farmer to use in return for keeping it up and keeping the brush pushed back to the fence lines. He could use it as his own. There was a line of sugar maples down the west side of the fields with a lane through them. At the edge of the field before the woodland began, there was a sugar house constructed, and there were about 10 acres of maple trees on land sloping toward it. Over the decades, this became a fine sugar bush, and I kept it clear of brush. When the older trees were damaged or died, I nurtured small new maples to replace them. The trees needed to be tapped out to catch the sap in early spring. The sap ran to the sugar shack through a pipeline and into a tank. The sap was boiled down in the sugar pan, much water leaving as sweet-smelling steam and leaving a golden maple syrup. I heard a car engine sputter and die. I got up from the table and looked out the back door. An old Ford Focus was just coasting to a stop in the lane, about 3 car lengths in from the dirt road that passed by my house. The wood road was often used as a lover's lane for kids parking, but they usually drove farther in. I could just barely see a small woman get out and go around to the other side of the car. 5 minutes later, she came back around with a child boosted up into her arms. She came out onto the road and started toward the house, spotting me watching her, and came across the yard to the door. This woman was striking. She had on jeans and a short-sleeve yellow top. It was conservative but just a little snug, accentuating her figure. Her hair was short and curly, a dark brown. The child, dressed nicely in jeans and a matching top, was clearly her daughter. The woman smiled and asked, "May I leave my car on your land for a little while? Something is wrong with it. You can get by it if you need to go down your wood road." I was tongue-tied for a moment because the two made an attractive picture standing before me. "How long?" I asked. "I don't know, until I get it fixed, anyway. I'll work at it." "How far is it to town?" "About 4 miles, give or take." I could see the child was a little girl about 3 years old. She was fussing and crying, clearly hungry. The woman soothed her, saying, "Shush, Nora. We'll get something to eat when we get to town." She turned back to me. "Are there many cars on the road? I need to hitch a ride in. 4 miles is a long walk." "Not many this time of night. They'd mostly be heading this way, not toward town." "Okay, I guess I'd better get moving. Don't you think you'd better feed your kids something before you start?" "I didn't want to bother you, but maybe a piece of bread and peanut butter? Come in. I'll see what I can scare up." I wasn't expecting company. I wasn't expecting to be company, but I'm glad I am. "How would you like an egg and a piece of toast?" "That sounds wonderful. My name is Isabel Harris." "Mine's James. James Walker." "Sit there at the table." There was a half stack of crackers on the table, and the little girl reached for one. "No, you wait," Isabel told her. "The nice man is getting you an egg. Let her have some if she's that hungry." "Milk's in the fridge behind you," I said. "Your wife not home?" she asked, prying a little. That upset me. Does this place look like a wife lives here? Look at the dust and the dirt. I keep the dishes done, and once a week, I shovel out some of what piles up. Actually, I keep a decent-looking house. Sorry, I wasn't looking around, she replied. I got out 2 frying pans and put 2 sausage patties in one, along with 2 strips of bacon. The other pan I buttered, placed 3 slices of bread in, and browned them. I dropped an egg in the pan, breaking the yolk and pressing the toast down onto it. Let me do that for you, Isabel offered. My mom used to make these, and I haven't had one in forever. Nora, you're going to love this. Don't eat any more crackers, or you'll be too full to enjoy a real treat. I covered the bacon and sausage to keep them warm. When Isabel finished cooking the second egg, I told her to eat while it was hot. I made the last one and slid it onto her plate. It was fully dark by now, and there was no way this woman and her child could make it to town tonight or arrange for a place to stay. I don't know your situation, I said, but you'd better stay here tonight. There are bedrooms upstairs. Pick one. The blankets might be a little stale. I can't help that. I'll be going to work in another hour, so you'll be alone. You can lock the door after I leave. I'll be home a little after 7 in the morning. You'd leave me in your house not even knowing anything about me? Why not? Your car is here and it doesn't run. You've told me your name, and you have a baby with you. You both are clean, so I know you respect yourself, and that tells me you'd respect my things and not take them. I continued, what's here is just stuff anyway, and I don't expect to get to know you well enough to have you trifle with my heart. You wouldn't want it anyway. It's turned cold as stone. I turned and went into the back room I used as a bedroom without waiting for a comment. I shut the door. I heard her take the dishes to the sink and start washing them. I changed into my work clothes and cursed myself. Why in hell had I let her and her kid into the house? She was younger and smaller than my ex-wife and not even as pretty. She appeared friendlier, though. You know what I mean? It was the smile. She had a nice shape, and I noticed that, too. She looked more like the girl next door. The kid was damn cute, too. Her mother probably had been just as cute at that age. I heard her climbing the stairs and looked at the clock. I had spent too much time sitting on the edge of the bed, thinking back. I'd be late if I didn't leave now. Isabel, I called up the stairwell. I'm leaving. I'll see you in the morning. Good night. She came to the top of the stairs. Thank you, James Walker. And I don't believe your heart is all stone. I think there's some warm gold hidden in it somewhere. Good night. Nora is asleep, or she'd say good night, too. I turned and went to work. I was a good machine operator, something I had learned in prison. 4 years ago, I was sentenced to prison for 3 to 5 years but was released in 2 years and 4 months. The prison sentence came from beating the man who had stolen my wife. While lying in my bunk in prison, I often wondered why I didn't beat her instead of him. I guess she must have worried about that, too, because she immediately asked for and received a restraining order before I was even sentenced. Before prison, I drove a local bus. One day, another driver called in sick, and I was asked to cover his route. I was stopped while letting a passenger off when I saw Emily going into a motel. On my return trip an hour later, her car was still there. I pulled the bus I was driving in behind her car. The 13 passengers I had on board questioned me, but I growled for them to be quiet, which shut them up. 10 minutes later, the motel door opened. I was out of the bus, and as a man stepped out, I grabbed him around the neck and threw his surprised self to the ground. He was bigger than me, but there was no stopping the beating I gave him. He got all he deserved and then some. Emily, my cheating wife, came out but couldn't get into her car because the bus was blocking it. She was crying and screaming, "Don't hurt him." I didn't know what he was to her at the time, but I had a good idea. Full knowledge came later. I landed one last blow to his gut, and that was all he had in him. He was just a limp lump on the ground. I looked around. Emily saw me looking at her and knew I could outrun her if she ran. She opted for the safety of the bus and the people on it, striding to the rear with all the passengers between her and me. I could see there were 4 phones in the hands of the riders, all calling the police. I got back in, saw where Emily was, backed up the bus, and pulled out into the street. I announced, "I'm not picking up any more passengers. As I get to your stop, pull the rope, and I'll let you off." There were only 4 passengers left by the time the police pulled the bus over. Emily was a very worried wife who had been caught cheating. By this time, she had been afraid all the passengers would have gotten off the bus, leaving just her and me. She was lucky, I guess. The bus company tried to charge me with theft of property, but I proved I was responsible by continuing my route. I was discharged, however. The assault? Well, I paid for that, but the rich man who had taken my wife paid a little as well. He could still run but not very far, and it hurt to do so. The cartilage in his knee was badly damaged, and the knee had to be replaced. About 6 months into my prison sentence, I was notified of a civil suit being filed against me by this man. It was for the bodily damage I had caused, something like $1.5 million. I laughed and forgot about it. I was a bus driver, for God's sake. 2 weeks later, the poor scumbag was in the hospital getting his other knee replaced. The men who worked him over suggested he drop the lawsuit. He screamed that I, James Walker III, had ordered it from my cell in prison. An investigation was instituted. Turned up nothing, and he dropped the suit. I do believe he was in fear for his health. I had not spoken to Emily since the incident. I kept her blocked in the back of my mind, but she came to the forefront occasionally. I met her in Boston before going home to see my folks after getting out of the service. I wore my uniform to a dance given to honor the returning troops. She was tall and thin with a small frame. Her hair was dark and she kept it styled. She had money of her own to dress well and keep looking beautiful. We danced several times, and before the evening was over, she was as intrigued with me as I was with her. This was enough to keep me from coming home for 3 more weeks. We were a couple by then. When I said my mom just had to see me, she followed me home, saying farm life was what she always wanted. The problem was the farm wasn't big enough to support me and a wife, even when Dad and Mom decided to move to a warmer place. Farm life was also a lot more work than a 9-to-5 job. It wasn't long before she became disenchanted, and I moved us to town. Jobs were scarce, and I took what I could find. I was a truck driver in the service, and a bus route was open. Emily sued for a divorce immediately following the incident with her lover. Good. She was nothing I wanted anymore, and I immediately signed the papers. She could not touch the farm, and my lawyer had enough evidence to show she was just a cheating wife. She didn't get much, but then, she didn't try very hard for it. The man, Henry Caldwell, had plenty of money, and, of course, she had her own. I had gained a skill while incarcerated. I was put into a work program and taught how to operate a computer-guided milling machine. I concentrated, and by the time I was released, I was in good condition to hold a job. In addition, it was a skill much in demand right here in my hometown. I had to pass a test and work the night shift just to be hired. I aced the test and hoped no one cared about me any longer. I wanted to keep to myself and out of the public eye. Of course, it didn't hurt that the manager of the factory had caught his own wife cheating a few years before. He was the one who conducted my interview. Some of these thoughts passed through my mind as I worked that night. Most of the work occurred when you set the machine up. After that, it was just keeping stock loaded and checking tolerances. My thoughts tonight traveled to my ex-wife's husband, as they usually did. I knew he was still after me. Me going to prison wasn't enough for him. What about the woman and the child I had let into my home last night? I guessed it would depend on if she shared her own story with me. Isabel, that was her name, looked to be about 24, but I would guess she might be a little older. I deduced this by her having a 3-year-old. I'll say she appeared to view her situation with an unworried eye, accepting what was dealt to her. This struck me as strange. I stopped and bought groceries on the way home. There wasn't enough in the house to last 3 people very long. Now why did I think that? Was I hoping Isabel would stick around for a while? It would be nice to have someone to talk to for a change. Just having her sitting across the table from me would be worth a lot. I hadn't had a feeling like this for a long time, especially concerning a female. I could smell coffee before I opened the door. Isabel was just crossing to the table with a cup as I hung my cap behind the kitchen door. I found enough flour to make pancakes, she said. I'm not too certain about the baking powder. The can was almost empty. Sold, I replied. I haven't used any since my wife left. That was more than 3 years ago. The maple syrup for the pancakes is made right here, and I'll guarantee there's nothing old about that. You've lived alone all this time since your wife left? Nope. The first 2 years I had plenty of company. I was in prison and that was too much company. They were all of one gender as well. Just these last 2 years, I've been alone. You beat up your wife? I'm just asking because I have to look out for Nora. No, I didn't touch her. I assaulted her lover. I stopped him some when I caught the two coming out of a motel room. Good for you. I did not go to jail when I caught my husband and his lover, but I got myself a whole handful of hair from her. I hope it never grows back either. She'd look funny with a bald spot just left of center. Well, aren't we a pair? We both burst out laughing. Nora was watching and then started banging her feet on the table leg, laughing because we were. Isabel, you know this is the first laugh I can remember having in the last year. Feels good. The pancakes, bacon, and sausages were excellent. When Isabel took the dishes to the sink, I asked, do you have to be any place right off? No, not really. I have to get a job sometime, that's all. I have an interview in town this afternoon. An older woman is looking for a roommate and is willing to watch Nora after I find work. Until then, she's going to let me keep house and run errands for her. Now I just have to get into town. Isabel, how old are you? I'm 24. How old are you? 29, but I feel 40 sometimes. Joy has gone out of living? She asked. You said it. I paused, then took a leap. Isabel, how about coming to work for me? I'll pay you to keep house. I realize you don't know anything about me, but I'll tell you one thing. I'm never going to do anything that would put me in prison again. I like my job and I'm making good money so I can afford to pay you. She looked at me, not saying anything. Your car isn't drivable. There's an almost new one backed onto the barn floor. You can use it to get around. You could work here and watch Nora yourself. Do you know anything about gardening? That would keep you busy in any spare time you have. If you don't, I can show you how. Sounds good, but I don't know about working for you. I think you want to know if I'm expecting benefits. No, I'm not. I haven't been upstairs in the last 6 months for anything, and I don't expect to be going up there in the next 6. I stood. Look, I have to sleep for a little while. Think it over and let me know. I usually eat around 1 and again at 7 in the evening. We'll discuss it when I get up at noon. I'll think about it. It's okay to call my mother, isn't it? She lives upstate. After that, can I wander around outside? Sure. Oh, if you want to call references concerning me, my Christmas card list is in that box over there. Call any of the people on the list. You can get their numbers out of the phone book. Of course, after you call them, we'll have company because they'll come to see the woman I'm hiring for a housekeeper. I smiled. Thanks for breakfast. It was a treat having someone cook it for me. Good night. I was up at noon, and after showering and shaving, I went across the lawn to the barn. I opened the doors wide and backed out a 5-year-old Honda Civic. I drove it up and parked it in the driveway. Isabel came out and looked at it. It does look new, she said. It should, because it has only 1,600 miles on it. I bought it for my wife to drive just before I caught her cheating on me. You can drive it if you need to go somewhere. Thank you. I will until I get my car fixed. I'll tell you what we can do. I'll take my tractor, bring your car down, and push it onto the barn floor. I can have one of my friends look at it and see how serious it is. If it costs too much to fix, you'd better sell it for scrap. Isabel was hesitant but said, okay. Over lunch, she said she would work as my housekeeper, and we agreed on terms. I paid her in advance from a wallet I kept in the cupboard containing my emergency fund. You're awful trusting to someone you've just met. You're gonna let me use your car, and I know where you keep some money. It's just material stuff. It isn't as if it was my heart. That's a bitter statement. I guess so. Let's get that car of yours into the barn. I'll get the tractor, and you can put the brakes on after I pull it back onto the road. I'll coast it right into the barn from there. Come on, Nora. Would you like to ride on a tractor? This excited the little girl, so she was jumping up and down with joy. The car didn't quite make it onto the barn floor, and I had to push it in the last little bit with the tractor bucket. I put the tractor away. Let's take a walk in the woods, I suggested. I usually do after I do dishes. No dishes for me to do, that's a real plus. It was a half-mile down the wood road to the backside of my property. Nora got tired, so I carried her on my shoulders most of the way back. That was fun for her and for me as well. This was the closest I had been to another human being for more years than I wanted to count. Isabel cooked a steak for supper, and we had mashed potatoes and carrots with cake for dessert. I laid down for a couple of hours before getting ready for work. While lying on my bed, I thought about this woman who had come into my life. Except for the one statement about pulling the hair of her husband's lover, I knew nothing personal about her. She had shared nothing else. One thing I did know. While I was supposedly sleeping this morning and she was outside wandering around, I checked my desk. She had been through it thoroughly. Even my nightstand in my bedroom had been opened. Was it just curiosity or something else? Time would tell. I left for work a few minutes early so I could make a call to one of my friends. Neil, I have a car shoved into my barn. It belongs to a woman I've hired to be my housekeeper. I thought everything was above board, but a couple of things make me suspicious. The woman has a little girl, and that part is wonderful. The little girl thinks I'm pretty great too. However, I noticed the woman went through all of my personal effects. I think she tried to do it without me noticing. I told her I'd have someone look at her car to see what it would cost to repair it. Would you come by Saturday morning and go over it? I mean, look into it as only you can do. In addition, she said she wanted to make a call. Can you find out if she did and to where? Sure, I can do that. Who do you suspect is behind this? I have no idea. I can't believe it goes back to my trouble with Henry Caldwell that put me in prison, but I suppose it could. The guy is rich enough, but I can't see him loving Emily enough to still come after me. Two things to remember that might cause this. James, 1, he's rich, and 2, he's now walking around on 2 replacement knees. He backed off on the civil suit, and I can't see him going after you again. Loving Emily is another reason, but that would be far down the list in my estimation. Also, don't forget you might just be a little paranoid over Emily. I know how much you loved her. I agree. Anyway, I'll see you Saturday. The rest of the week went well. My meals were on time, and I had more time to get out into the woods each day. I had cut trees last fall for my sugaring operation and was now cutting the logs into furnace-length pieces and bringing them to the woodshed to be split, stacked, and dried. Nora, who seemed to think I was the best thing since cookies, wanted to be out in the woods with me. Isabel pitched in by picking up wood, and I taught her to drive the tractor with the trailer full of logs. It had been so long since I'd been this close to a woman that I sometimes caught myself staring at her. I was cautious, though. She didn't catch me looking. Anyway, I was enjoying myself. Saturday afternoon, Neil called me down to the barn where he had the car engine running. James, there's some cause for concern, just as you suspected. The car was partially disabled. There was a wire disconnected. That could happen, but this is the kicker: there were 2 wires off. That tells me they were removed on purpose. I found more when I searched the car. In the passenger door pocket, I found a crumpled receipt for an oil change. It was made out to a firm called Delta Investigations with an address in Albany, New York. The call was made to a Mrs. Anderson, who lives in a suburb of Albany. You've got yourself a spy working for, and I suspect against you. It looks like it, and it's too bad. I love the little girl. Hell, the woman has only been here a few days, and I like her too. I guess I'll keep quiet about what I know and not say anything yet. Let's go up to the house and have a beer. You might let the boys know what's happening in case you get into a bind again. Just say the word if you want anything done. We all owe you big time. Just don't do anything to land yourself back in prison again. We can help you, but it has to stay undercover. I won't. I was changing, though. I had become almost a recluse after prison. I never went anywhere socially. I went to work and then home, stopping only for groceries and other necessities. Now, I had a little girl who saw no reason to fear or exclude me from her world. I couldn't exclude her from mine either. Too sweet. If anyone had asked me about Isabel, I would have stated she was just my housekeeper. Over time, though, I came to think of her as much more. Where before I didn't leave the farm because I wanted to avoid people, now I wanted to stay on the farm just to be near Isabel and Nora. Sometimes she would glance at me when she didn't think I noticed. Did she want to say something? During those times, she looked sad, and I knew something was bothering her. Most of the time, though, she acted friendly, even if it felt forced. Planting season started, and I had a plot plowed up by the farmer who used the fields. Nora was out gathering worms as the ground was turned. I took her to a nearby lake, and we caught a dozen perch. When it was time to clean the fish, she was right there with me, watching closely. She managed to gut and clean the last one herself. Isabel wasn't too thrilled when her daughter came in with fish blood and guts on her hands. But Nora was so proud that Isabel didn't say much. We all went to a garden supply store to get seeds and plants to set out. We came home with more than we had room for in the garden. Isabel and Nora had marked out the rows while I was sleeping, and the next morning, I stayed up to help plant the sets and seeds. I planted 2 rows of potatoes. The next day, Nora was ecstatic when the radishes started popping through the ground, and even more so when she tasted the first small one I deemed big enough to eat. Within a few weeks, we had become comfortable with each other. I knew Isabel was here under false pretenses, so I held back from demonstrating any affection for her. That's not to say I wasn't falling in love with her, though. I could show love for Nora, and I did. I suppose we acted much like any family. We went to the movies on weekends, and I took them out for breakfast at a local diner at least twice a week. 3 weeks after Isabel was hired, I said, "I'm going into town for a haircut. Wouldn't you like to get your hair done? I can't really afford to, but thanks for thinking of it. I'll pay. Your hair is getting long, and I can tell it's a bother. I'll bet you'd look nice with a perm. Do you think so? I've never considered having my hair cut that short. It would go nicely with your freckles. Just a thought. Most men don't care for freckles. I'm not like most men. I guess I like them. I'll make an appointment." The weeks went by, and I think Isabel examined every personal paper in my house. Neil stopped by for a beer one Saturday in June, and we went for a walk in the woods. "James," Neil said, "Henry Caldwell was seen going into the Delta Detective Agency during the week. He didn't look happy when he came out. I suspect things will be coming to a head for Isabel, and she'll be leaving soon." Came sooner than I expected. She was hanging up the phone as Neil and I returned from our walk. "James, I just received word that one of my friends is very sick and wants me to come take care of her. I guess I'll have to say goodbye. I'll be leaving just as soon as I get packed." "Okay. I'm sorry your friend is sick. If you must go, you must. I know how friends are, and sometimes you have to help them out." I turned to Neil. "Would you back her car out of the barn? I want to say goodbye to Nora. I've come to love that little girl, and I'm going to miss her terribly." Neil didn't stay to watch me say goodbye to Isabel. Nora couldn't stop crying when it was time to go, clinging to me as hard as she could. Isabel, the last woman I said goodbye to, I was glad to see go. "I don't feel that way about you. May I hug you? What makes you think we'll meet again?" Isabel asked as she stepped into my arms. I had no real answer but responded, "You helped cut the wood. So when the sap starts to run next spring, I'll plan on you being here to have the first taste of the syrup when it comes from the pan." Through tears, Isabel smiled. "Is that an old Vermont proverb?" "No, it's just Vermont hope, that a person's life will be better in the future than what is behind them." She clung to me for a moment longer. Then Nora's arms left her mother's and wrapped around my neck. "I kiss you," Nora said, planting a kiss on my cheek before reluctantly letting go. The following week, I arrived home one evening to find someone waiting for me. It was Emily, standing next to her car parked in front of the house. "James," she said, "Henry got beaten up again last Friday, and his arm was broken in 2 places. I suppose you have an alibi the same as last time? If you think I broke his arm, you'd better have me investigated." I replied sharply. "What are you doing here, Emily?" She hesitated. "Henry's never going to give up. He wants you back in jail, and he has the money to do it. You humiliated him too much by giving him a beating in front of people all those years ago." "That was nearly 5 years ago," I snapped. "I suppose stealing a wife from a man wasn't humiliating? I wasn't smart like him, Emily. I just struck out without knowing or caring about the results. Cost me my job, my wife, and my good name. I'm a felon now." Emily looked away, ashamed. I continued, "Why are you here? What do you want?" "I'm here because Henry's obsession with you is driving us both insane. I know you've suffered, but so have I. Maybe more. I just wanted to warn you that he won't stop. Emily, what do you expect me to do about it? I'm not going after Henry, but if he keeps coming after me, I'll defend myself in whatever way I need to. Why don't you two just move out to the West Coast and start over? You've ruined my life, but that doesn't mean you can't have some happiness for yourself. Do you honestly mean that? Emily asked, her voice trembling. Yes, I do, I replied, turning to go inside. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to do. Emily opened her car door and got in, but before driving off, she said, for what it's worth, I'm sorry, James. For everything. After she left, I spent the next hour fixing some of the damage in the house from when Henry had stormed in weeks ago. The broken chair in the kitchen, smashed dishes, and hanging cupboard door were all reminders of how much I had endured because of him. When I finally lay down to rest, my mind drifted to Nora and Isabel. I missed them terribly, and for the first time in years I considered what it would feel like to truly start over. By the following morning, the decision had been made. I called Mrs. Anderson, Isabel's mother. Hello, Mrs. Anderson. This is James Walker. I was wondering if Isabel and Nora might be available for a visit sometime soon. Oh, Mr. Walker. Nora talks about you every day, and Isabel. Well, she's been quieter than usual. I think she's missing you too. That's good to hear. Would Sunday be a good day to visit? Sunday would be perfect, Mrs. Anderson replied warmly. We'll see you then. On Sunday morning, I arrived at the Anderson home. Nora ran out the door as soon as I stepped out of the car. She jumped into my arms, shouting, I kiss you. Isabel appeared at the door with a smile, watching as I swung Nora around. Inside, we sat down for coffee and talked. Isabel was hesitant at first, but as the morning went on, she began to relax. After lunch, I took her aside. Isabel, I've been doing some thinking. You and Nora have become a big part of my life, and I don't want to lose that. Would you consider coming back to the farm? Not as my housekeeper, but as something more? I think we can build something together. Tears welled up in Isabel's eyes. James, I've wanted to hear you say something like that for weeks. Yes, I'll come back. But only if we promise to be honest with each other about everything from now on. Deal, I said, pulling her into a hug. A week later, Isabel and Nora returned to the farm with me. Nora was thrilled to be back, running around the house and the yard like she owned the place. Isabel settled in quickly, resuming her role as caretaker. But now, the air between us was different. We weren't just employer and employee anymore. We were building a life together. Isabel and I sat down that evening to talk about everything. James, she said, I feel like I owe you an explanation about why I came to your house in the first place. My brother works for Delta Investigations, and he sent me to gather information about you. At first, I was just doing my job, but I never expected to care about you or Nora the way I do now. I nodded. I know. Neil found some evidence in your car that linked you to Delta Investigations. I suspected you were here for a reason other than needing help. But the truth is, I don't care why you came anymore. What matters is that you stayed and that we found each other. Isabel smiled through tears. I'm so sorry for lying to you. I want to make this work, James. I want to build a life here with you and Nora. So do I said. And Isabel, there's nothing left in my past to come back and haunt us. I've dealt with everything, and I'm ready to move forward with you. Over the next few months, life settled into a comfortable routine. Isabel took over the garden, managing to produce more vegetables than I thought possible. Nora became my shadow, following me into the woods and even trying her hand at splitting logs. Isabel joked that she'd be running the farm by the time she turned 5. One evening, while we were all sitting on the porch watching the sunset, I turned to Isabel. I've been thinking about something, I said. I want us to be a family officially. Isabel Harris, will you marry me? Her eyes widened, and she looked at Nora, who was grinning ear to ear. Mommy, say yes, Nora shouted. Isabel laughed, tears streaming down her face. Yes, James. Of course, I'll marry you. We planned a simple wedding held in the field behind the house. My 9 friends from my time in the service all came, bringing their families along. Neil stood as my best man, and Nora served as Isabel's flower girl. It was a beautiful day, filled with laughter, love, and hope for the future. As we sat down to dinner that evening, Isabel took my hand. James, I never thought I'd find happiness again after everything that happened in my life. But you and Nora have given me a second chance. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure we're happy. I squeezed her hand. And I'll do the same, Isabel. This is our fresh start. Spring arrived, and with it came the first run of sap from the maple trees. Isabel and Nora were as excited as I was. The aroma of boiling sap filled the sugar shack as we worked together to produce the first batch of syrup for the season. James, Isabel said, holding up a spoonful of the golden syrup, I think this is the best batch yet. Nora clapped her hands. I want to taste it, she exclaimed. I lifted her up so she could dip her spoon into the warm syrup. Her delighted smile was worth all the effort. Life on the farm flourished. Isabel took charge of the garden, and we expanded it, adding more crops and even a small flower patch for Nora. I found myself smiling more than I had in years, and my heart felt lighter each day. One evening, as we sat around the table after dinner, Isabel said, James, I've been thinking, this place has so much potential. What if we opened it up to visitors during sugaring season? People could come see how syrup is made and maybe buy some to take home. I thought about it for a moment and nodded. That's a great idea. Could bring in some extra income and show people the beauty of this place. We spent the summer preparing for the next sugaring season, building a small visitor center near the sugar shack and creating walking paths through the woods. By the following spring, we were ready. Families came to see the process, and children marveled at the trees and the steam rising from the pans. Nora took it upon herself to be the official greeter, charming everyone who visited. As the years passed, the farm became a thriving operation. Isabel and I worked side by side, raising Nora and building a life we both cherished. The scars of the past faded, replaced by the warmth of a new beginning. My friends from the service remained close, often visiting with their families. They became an extended part of our family, sharing in our joys and triumphs. One evening, as we watched the sunset from the porch, Isabel leaned her head on my shoulder. James, do you ever think about how far we've come? I smiled, wrapping my arm around her. All the time, and I wouldn't trade any of it for the world. Nora ran up, holding a jar of fireflies she had caught. Look, Mommy, Daddy, they're glowing, she said, her excitement lighting up the evening. Isabel and I exchanged a glance, both of us smiling. Life had brought us together under unusual circumstances, but it had given us something extraordinary: a family, a home, and a future filled with hope. Thanks for watching this story of love, redemption, and new beginnings. What was your favorite part? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more great stories. See you next time.